Throughout my life, I've always had a strong motivation to work in community building. My family was very involved with community, and as I was growing up, I realized how important that was to my family and to the community that I grew up in. And I think I just really absorbed that as a philosophy that I wanted to carry on. And in particular, my great uncle, I grew up in my grandfather's house, and his brother, my great uncle, was a state representative for about 20 years. And although I know that sometimes politicians, especially at the higher levels, aren't really thought of as being community centered, my uncle really was. And every year of my youth and before me and beyond me, my uncle sent around and staffed a float every Christmas Eve and gave out stockings and fruit to all the kids, and everybody in our whole town looked forward to it. And it really just built this amazing tradition and a gathering time and a gathering space that broadened just outside of that individual household to the whole community where households came together. And it was, it's something that people still talk about in our town today. I, again, have always been interested in being involved in the community that I live in. And part of that involvement was political. And so what that meant for me was to be making an effort in my everyday life to be aware of what was going on in my neighborhoods and my community, around me. And because of that, I had signed up for emails from the township I live in. And those emails were just informational about meetings and development. And I received one of those emails that talked about a development, and it was confusing to me because what I understood the email to be saying, where the development was going to be occurring, I was confused because I knew that that was really supposed to be preserved land. And so to orient myself, actually I had been doing a work trade or a volunteer. I was serving as a volunteer for some period of time at New Leaf. And at the time I was serving as a volunteer there, one of the previous Ferguson Township Supervisors was serving as well, Elliot Killian. And so I just followed up with the email asking Elliot casually, what's going on with that development? I'm confused. It seems like it's out there where I always see animals and, unfortunately, animals getting hit there. It seems like it's an important space, and I know my understanding is it's outside the regional growth boundary, and it's, not supposed to be developed. He basically confirmed that other people had similar concerns. And so when I learned that other people had similar thoughts or concerns, I really felt like it was my job to find out, the status of those concerns in the community and how the township was handling that. And the more involved I got, the more I realized about this particular development. It really was something that was not going to be good for the community, and that I should get more involved. It probably wasn't too long after that. Again, it was a while ago, so I'm not 100% sure. But as I began doing research about what's called the upzoning that happened in 2004 that set the stage for the land development plan later, when I read what I had found, saw the research, there were others at the regional level that were indicating that it was important to not develop there because of the water. And so it was really as I did the research that I learned that. I grew up within 5 miles of 3 Mile Island, during that time. So I do understand, and I've studied risk a bit. I did some work on public perceptions of genetically modified organisms. And so part of my research was to look at risk and how, it's evaluated on these two levels, or on two dimensions, which are likelihood and severity. And then reflecting back to my childhood, it's like, yeah, it's almost 0% likely that it's going to occur, but if it does, it's catastrophic. And that I am drawn to situations where I see that, because I don't like catastrophes. Yeah, didn't like the idea that I would never be able to return to my home carrying one suitcase of my belongings and leaving my entire community, which was extraordinarily important to me, behind. And I have an amazing amount of empathy for those that that no longer can go back to their homes in Chernobyl. I think that when people are in such a position of privilege that they forget that that many people don't have the luxury of assessing risk in the manner that we give to ourselves. And I do feel that many of the people that are involved with preserving this water are not in my backyard type people. They really do believe that this is an asset of the commons, and that it should be there for the commons. And that includes people that are displaced and that don't have clean water anymore. And I think that there's a real strong feeling about that we're not just protecting our water source, we're protecting a water source of the planet. Many governments take a position of a precautionary principle when there is an issue that is potentially catastrophic. And I don't think that the hydrogeologist that you talked about me talking about at the site, he does not come from that perspective. And I think that, the social dimension of his risk analysis is no longer valid in this day and age. Ferguson Township in particular had been a little bit behind the 8 ball on various zoning things that had caused some problems. So for example, the Thistlewood development, if Ferguson Township, the municipality, would have had a proper overlay, a proper riparian overlay there, or forest land overlay, those houses probably wouldn't have been built because of the water that's coming off the mountain there. And so unfortunately, the solution to that was to have all of the people that, or at least the people that are on certain parts of that development, actually sign away their right to sue in the case of flooding or water damage, because it was such an inappropriate place to build. And so when I learned those kinds of things, I realized, just like a person, a municipality can make a mistake too. And it really looked like that this was another case of that. I realized that the State College Borough Water Authority, although they have the responsibility to serve their customers clean water, that they don't have the authority in terms of land use planning and regulation to actually institute the regulations and the proper zoning to protect that water, and that was really the responsibility of the municipality. And that Ferguson Township, because a large amount of that recharge area is in Ferguson Township was going to be one of the main municipalities that would be responsible for doing that. It is my personal opinion that for many years in Ferguson Township, there was a lot of work that was left undone from the policy perspective. I'm not talking about staff, I'm talking about policy. And what that means is visioning in terms of planning for growth that is consistent with community goals. Pretty much all of our planning documents were extremely out of date when I took office. And so because there's a lot of work that was, I think, left by the wayside in pursuit of personal agendas, I believe that in Ferguson, at this point in time, there's more time and effort demanded than of if a municipality had had very active supervisors for the past 20 years, but they didn't. In my position, what I'm working on and in my involvement, I don't get by with anything less than probably 40 or 50 hours a week. I'm doing this in full-time capacity, and that involves going to meetings that other elected officials are in no way obligated to go to. I have not missed a water authority meeting since this began 2 years ago, and they meet monthly. I feel like I've really developed a lot of personal relationships because I've been so involved. So I always go to the water authority meetings. I frequently go to the sewer authority meetings. I frequently go to the regional planning meetings. I always go to the park authority meetings. And none of those are requirements of my position. A lot of us want to get involved with our community, and we're not sure how, and sometimes when opportunity knocks on the door, it's maybe bigger than we thought. It's not just making cookies for a bake sale once. It's something that is going to demand all of your time and all of your attention. And I did realize that in this particular case, that if I didn't step up, there wasn't going to be somebody to step up at that time. And the time was short, and we needed somebody then. So as you know, we're all maybe in separate little boats, but we're all rowing to the same place. And I think that actually that has been a major strength of the larger effort to protect our water, not just from this tolls development, but like I said, in terms of the water authority and Ferguson Township finally truly understanding the relationship that's necessary to protect that watershed. Really, what is good for the community is good for Penn State, because we do have a symbiotic relationship, and although frequently people discuss that they have the power to give us jobs, I will immediately talk to those folks about the fact that you giving labor to them is why they exist. So it is not one direction, it's both directions. And I think that in our community, and I think this is something that needs to be talked about in a conscious manner, because I think it's something that evolved through no fault per se of anyone, but because we've had this perception of, my word, we wouldn't even exist if Penn State weren't here. We have allowed them to be in charge. And I'm not advocating that they should be in the place where we've placed ourselves, the community. We don't need to be in charge, but there should be reciprocity there. So many people are surprised to find out that there are 3 boards in regional government where Penn State University has a vote to represent Penn State's interests on those citizen boards that are to represent the community interest. And then when those boards make a decision and it's discussed with the elected officials who have appointed all of the representatives except for the Penn State representative, it's discussed with us like those boards made the decision, even if it's only Penn State's rep that's making a decision. So in a recent dialogue, Ferguson Township Supervisors were given a letter from the Center Region Planning Agency making a synopsis of what happened at the Center Regional Planning Commission meeting, where Penn State's representative voiced their lack of support for a citizen-inspired preservation effort in Ferguson Township. And it was communicated to the supervisors like, Center Region Planning Commission, doesn't support this preservation effort. But I was at that meeting, and the only voice that didn't support that was Penn State. And I think it's actually a little bit misleading to, if you're going to have the rep and they're going to vote, when you communicate about who said what, it's kind of important to indicate that person on the board is the only person that's representing a private interest. Everyone else is representing the public interest. And that's kind of a tangent, but it has, it's a good example of how we have allowed Penn State to have the upper hand in the relationship. I don't remember ever hearing any other elected official until very recently talk about why isn't there an elected official invited to sit on their board of trustees or in the office of the physical plant in their planning department. One of their highest people in office of the physical plant sits on our Center Regional Planning Commission and throws a fit about anything that's not something that Penn State wants. And all of the municipalities are much more supportive of each other than Penn State is supportive of the municipalities, and that's very disappointing. I know that some of those conditions set up that imbalance, and I want to hit at those conditions. So you talked about other occupies and like other agendas coming in. We've been really trying to keep the focus super narrow here to the Toll Brothers effort, but also the structural problems that led to the Toll Brothers being virtually invited into our community by Penn State and then supported by the elected officials because Penn State had incentivized their support of the development of the watershed by dangling a carrot in front of them of the asset of Whitehall Regional Park. So it's important to bring everybody along to understand those structural imbalances that led to this very bad decision. That's what led to that. And many people that really love this community are confused. Like, we're confused. We think it would be fine because we can't imagine the decision makers that we've elected allowing something like this to occur. Well, it's important for them to know that those decision makers don't necessarily have the control to stop it in the current structure. Changing that is going to be really important moving forward. There have been so many people that have gotten so involved and so educated on the area, on the topic. The occupation in particular has changed the dynamics of the discussion on a community level a little bit, because although there were folks that were having a lawsuit and there's been a fair amount of success in regard to that, despite the fact that that was happening, it still did not feel like the community was on any kind of an equal footing in terms of respect in this dialogue until the occupation occurred. And when that happened, then Penn State decided, okay, now we want to talk to you. The folks that are organizing the encampment have been directly approached via email to sit down and talk about this in hopes of getting to a solution. And I have to say that gives me a lot of hope, because I think everybody we talk to acknowledges that Penn State has a lot of power and they have a lot of land, and that if they really do decide with their administrative mind that it's actually time to join with the community to work toward a unified goal with the community, I think that they would find that the community would step up and support them as well. And I don't think we've ever been in a position that we could actually even think that we might have that conversation. If Penn State really wants to change this, it's literally just a few decisions, and they really can not expose themselves to risk because they have so many resources. So they don't have to tell Toll Brothers that they won't sell them any land. They can just tell the Toll Brothers they have a different parcel. Folks would support that. The solution is right there in their grasp. Penn State and Toll Brothers would come to the table with the community, including Ferguson Township Supervisors and representatives of all of the community groups that have been working on preservation. And we would discuss the solution that is on the table. And that solution is Penn State identifies another land asset, and we already have the county plat book. We already know what they own. We already know they know what they own. But to have a discussion together with the maps about an appropriate alternative site for what they want to build, luxury student housing, that is named with football players' names and blue and white names, being closer to campus. And then the other asset that they own over off of Whitehall, that they will honor the wishes of the region, the wishes of the farmers, the wishes of the water protectors, and put that land into some sort of passive use. And they can brainstorm and come up with a beautifully creative educational facility that could be located there with minimal impact, that could be placed closer to the road. There's already a professor at the university that's been working on this, who has grant funding that does research on climate change and agriculture. And that professor has been discussing with finance and business at Penn State that this particular property, this watershed property, is actually an ideal property for that kind of low impact research that he wants to do. So I would like Penn State and Toll Brothers and the community to come to the table and explore how this could actually be turned into a win-win-win situation for everybody. I think that if Penn State didn't make the right moves here, they would be really fracturing deeply the relationship between them and the community. They've already taken such advantage of their position of power and not stepped up to meet that with responsibility. And I just can't really imagine what people will think of them and how they'll act toward them as an institution. In the court of public opinion, they would be the losers. We want Penn State to be something we can be proud of. We can't wait for that moment. So all they have to do is just do that. And we will pick up our pom-poms again.